Hey, welcome in here on a Building Blocks Thursday. And of course, that means I'm joined by Tim Verghese. And of course, the Building Blocks Thursdays are brought to you by Bubbles and Blocks Child Development Center. 3 convenient locations across the capital city of Lincoln. Bubbles and Blocks is well suited to handle your child care needs. I, of course, had my young son Hudson at Bubbles and Blocks when I lived in Lincoln. And one of the cool things that I experienced with Bubbles and Blocks is how they kind of help your child sort of through early phases, sensory exploration, getting them involved with some art at a very early age, getting them used to using a spoon, using their hands, finding themselves with their hands, all these sort of things you don't think about when you become a dad. Naturally, you're thinking about how you can make sure that you're not raising the next baby Gronk. And these guys are going to make sure that if you do have a child, that they have functional use of their fingers and can help make some really cool stuff like this. I have a cheers to the best dad thing. Those are Hudson's thumbprints in there. These are the sort of things that you can get at Bubbles and Blocks. I know that doesn't make sense for the podcast listeners, but on YouTube, you at least got to see it. So, much like recruits value stability, so do parents, and so does Bubbles and Blocks, where its management team has been in place since 2019, with some of them having even started with the daycare when it opened in 2013. Spots are open at all 3 centers. Get your child enrolled today. Give them a call at 402-328-0404 or shoot an email to info@bubblesandblocks.com. All right, Tim, it was National Signing Day Part 2, fake signing day, as we are accustomed to kind of knowing it as, but a very big one for Nebraska. Kind of walk through like why yesterday was fairly significant for Nebraska, even though there's just one signee in Dylan Barryman, but one that kind of felt like Nebraska really needed in the end here.
Yeah, I mean, considering how the portal went, just in terms of specifically the very end of it, with the Berberia recruitment, with their involvement with Terrence Green, Oregon transfer, and just obviously looking at the high school class not having a defensive line addition here in 2026, it was pretty important that they landed a guy like Dylan Barryman, and I've said this a few places. I mean, the thing with Barryman's not just the fact that, okay, you look at the measurable, it's 6'1.5", 330 pounds. They don't have a guy that looks like that on the roster currently. It's not just that, because there's guys that are like that. You've seen it across the years of high school D linemen that aren't ready to play year one. It's not the case with Dylan. I mean, you look at his tape, you look at what he looks like. I mean, the frame, like you look at that frame, and you just listen to those measurables, and you're like, oh, there must be some bad weight on there. There really isn't, not really at all. Like it's pretty muscled up, and he's a guy that also plays basketball, was just hooping last night against Ahmad Hudson. And so he has some athleticism to him. You see that on tape. He's got an exceptional motor. He played both sides of the ball for Washington Parish last year. And so this is a guy who, year one, you're counting on him being part of the rotation. And he's a guy that if, he's going to enroll in the summer, he's not going to get spring ball, but if he hits the ground running, this is a guy that might not only contribute, like has a chance to be like at the very top of the rotation at that one tech spot, because they need that. They need a big guy like that, a guy that can take up gaps, can defend the run at the high level like he can. I will say that, 24/7's Andrew Ivins, I believe it was Ivins that wrote the comp for him, but comped him to Jaden Jackson. I think that's a pretty good one. I comped him to CJ West. I think, long-term upside wise, like, there's some Byron Murphy in there too, who's obviously, set to play in the Super Bowl here on Sunday. But all 3 of those guys were contributing pretty early on and in a pretty big role at their pro. Like Jaden Jackson was a day one contributor for Oklahoma, and a guy that immediately improved their run defense. And so if this guy, if Dylan proves to be what he can be for Nebraska, it's a big deal. And on top of all of that, Nebraska's had just an unfortunate, it's been a back and forth, but they've gone back and forth with Kentucky here over the last couple of years, trading some shots. You had Wandale Robinson way back in the day, Dane Key. Of course, they flipped Kenny Minchie. And so to get that head-to-head win over Kentucky in a recruitment that got very, very dicey. I had my prediction in a week before. It really felt like Nebraska was going to be the pick literally the night before. Like, 10 p.m. night before signing day, things got a little hectic. It started to swing back Kentucky's way. Nebraska got that resolved, woke up the next morning, and pretty much everyone I talked to was like, all right, this is done. It's a done deal. It's going to be Nebraska. But yeah, this just got very dicey pretty much up until the finish line. So big win just for all of those reasons.
A couple things in there, and we'll start with this. Ahmad Hudson was wearing a Nebraska, what do we call it, a headband?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like a traditional headband. I don't know what exactly you would call it, but he was rocking Nebraska last night. I enjoyed the photo of Dylan Barryman and Ahmad Hudson standing there as someone's about to shoot free throws, getting ready to square off in a rebound context.
Oh, can you imagine having to like fight for a rebound against Dylan Barryman?
I really can't. I really can't. I mean, he's built like a little bull. I mean, that's kind of what he looks like. And I think, again, I don't know what he's going to be able to contribute in his first year. I think the biggest thing is make sure that he takes care of what he needs to take care of, that he can enroll at Nebraska without issue here this June. And then you just kind of figure out what you can throw at him, where you can utilize him. Is he someone that really only plays for you in short yardage situations defensively? Is he someone where you just try to get him a handful of snaps every game and you let it go from there? I mean, we'll see what the red shirt rule looks like. I don't think you worry about that with a guy like this so much. I think what he can give you is as important as how much as you can actually play him. So if you can only play him 5 to 10 snaps because of a conditioning thing, that's 5 to 10 snaps where you could potentially eat up a couple offensive linemen just from size alone. And so I'm really fascinated. They just haven't gotten guys like this. I mean, you've covered this for, I don't know, off and on, 5 years now, 4 or 5 years.
Like that. Yeah.
And it's hard to explain because like Nash Hutmaker was a big guy and Ty Robinson, he was a big guy. But this is the closest to like the Damian Daniels type player. And he was so instrumental in Nebraska's defense being what it was in the first 10 games of the 2021 season. Like, when I've just screamed from the rafters about Nebraska needing help along the defensive line, I'm thinking about a guy like this, like someone that you can park in the middle of that defense. And it's a big part of why I felt like coming into the last season, they didn't do themselves a big enough favor by you were basically playing Elijah Judy and Riley Van Poppel in that spot where you needed somebody who looked a lot more like Dylan Barryman.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you add that guy to what you've also already added in Owen Studemeyers, depending on where he's at from a health standpoint. You see Whittington, who again is more of a slasher, more of a slicer compared to him, but you feel at least a little better about where that D-line room is entering 2026. But I mean, of course, again, like you mentioned, have to make sure he gets on campus, and you have to make sure everyone's healthy. I mean, I still think it's a room with concerns. I mean, it's a room that you're going to need. I mean, it's going to need best case scenario from a lot of guys in that room on the interior and the edge for this defense to take a sizable step forward, in my opinion. I think the unit around them has significantly improved, the secondary and the linebacker room. But I do think I'm really interested to see kind of where these guys are at through spring and kind of what this order looks like. Because you look at the names on the roster, you look at kind of how things stand. And I mean, like for me, I feel a little, I mean, just from I mean, you saw the roster update where they have guys lined up as defensive tackles and defensive or edges now. Looking at who is in that defensive tackle room, looking at the edge, I feel a little bit better about the depth in both those rooms. Is kind of looking now that the room is separated. But I still certainly have questions about what the top end of that room is going to look like. Both those rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dylan Barryman was the one person who signed on Wednesday. And at least to me, it seemed like there was going to be a quarterback involved with this because Tanner Vibable was committed to Nebraska pretty early in January. Did it sound about right? I mean, it was
like January 14th, I believe. Yeah.
So what is the story here? Because now it seems like James Madison's involved. I don't think that he signed anywhere at this point. What do you know about this? What do we need to know about someone who not to make too much of it, I think it was very much a developmental quarterback prospect, but it was another guy that you were adding to your room, since tight end Dayton Raiola is now on his way to Oregon.
Yeah, this is weird. This is a weird one. Just because, I mean, when you actually break down what's going on, it kind of makes some sense. So here's where we're at. I mean, in terms of it's Thursday, he's going to announce where he's signing, or he's going to sign here at 3:30 Central Time, 1:30 local time for him out in Vegas. And so for him, essentially what it is, and you saw this with another recruit that was committed to a Power 4 program. James Madison is essentially swept in here late, and this is where, you know, some of the kind of benefit of, or what the purpose kind of NIL and rev share, where this is how you even kind of the floor, you know, for a guy that Nebraska didn't allocate much, if at all, any like rev share here. There's not a whole, like, this is QB4, essentially a developmental guy. You're not expecting him to see the field for 2 to 3 years. Kind of like a late value add, just, you know, someone to just round out the room. They were excited about him, no doubt, but like, this isn't a guy you allocate NIL resources for. James Madison is a program where they can say, hey, you can come be QB2, or, you know, come compete for the backup job. We'll give you a shot to like potentially start down the line. And we'll also compensate you like that. Like, you'll be on our rev, like you'll get a rev share. Like, I don't know if Nebraska's doing that for you, but you'll get one here. And so when you assess that situation, it makes some sense for him just from a pure football standpoint in terms of getting on the field. It would make some sense. That said, this is going to go, I mean, you know, right now it feels like this is going to be James Madison. I don't think conversations have stopped necessarily with both sides. Otherwise, I would have, I thought we would have had a decision potentially this morning if you know, conversations were all but done. But in fact, conversations are still ongoing. We'll see what happens here in the next few hours. At this point, it's probably going to be James Madison, which would sting, would be an unfortunate late development here, because, I mean, again, this guy wasn't necessarily going to see the field, but you feel better about the QB room and the depth in there if you have 4 scholarship quarterbacks, or 4 true kind of scholarship quarterbacks. And this was also a guy who, you know, for you know, we know how much the staff values practice and all of that. This would have given them a live scout team arm, like a guy they could take the green jersey off of. You can go live. That's important. You know, learn how to hit the quarterback, learn how to hit. And this is the guy who runs 4.4, you know, like can present them with some looks from a dual threat standpoint that others in the room really can do some things that others really can't. And so from that standpoint, to lose him here late would really sting. That said, I would anticipate Nebraska still does their due diligence here in the next few months and figures out maybe a way to maybe add another 26 quarterback of some sort. I do think they want to add and have, you know, a full room. And now they're about to lose a guy. So, or seemingly trending to lose a guy. So, I'm really curious to see how they approach this over the next few months.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating because, again, it's not like it's going to hurt you in the 2026 season or even 2027, but it is notable. Like, they kind of went out and scouted and found a guy like this. There's something that they like about him. And you mentioned that he's got sort of a unique skill set. It is it's definitely a thing where I can see why, if you're Nebraska, you'd like to keep him in the fold. But as you said, you don't want to allocate resources there when you're already kind of up against it. I mean, they've allocated what they really can. We know they don't want to put a lot of money into high school recruits as it is, unless you're at a certain level. And so there's just a fine line as to what they can walk. You know, for James Madison, you're a college football playoff team. Kurt Signetti came from where you were at. Now your previous coach is at UCLA. Like, there's a bit of a draw there. And, you know, if you're Nebraska, I guess the best you can really do is, hey, doesn't it make the most sense to start yourself out at a big school? And then if you decide James Madison is where you want to be at, do that. Otherwise, you might never have an opportunity to be at a Big Ten school or a Power 4 school if you don't.
Yeah, like that's essentially the pitch. And I mean, the other part of this is going to be like the kind of the sight unseen part of this, because he will essentially be committing to a program relatively sight unseen. I don't believe he visited, unless he snuck in there
Right.
Under the radar over the weekend. But he did get out to Nebraska. He's seen Nebraska, and so that's, again, part of this, and why I'm curious to see how these next few hours kind of progress.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's jump into this 2026 class. And what I mean by this, not the transfers. I mean, we've talked about the transfers. We'll spend another episode kind of just going specifically on kind of the transfers, but I want to talk about the high school guys, of which there are 11. We'll see what happens with Tanner Vibable here, but I'm not going to get that name right. Like, I keep wanting to change it to something else, and I don't know why. But eventually, I'll either need to know it or I won't ever have to know it again. So they had 11 guys signed, so not a big class by any means. Sort of a unique class where it took a while for them to build it, and we've talked about that before. But there's definitely some pieces in here that could help right away in 2026. And so we'll start with that. And some of this, I'm going to throw some superlatives at Tim, and he's going to have to think on the spot and give some answers back with absolutely no preparation from me, letting him know what I'm going to ask. And one of them is, who do you think has the best chance out of these 11 guys to help right away this upcoming 2026 season?
Yeah, so you've got, I mean, Danny Odom's, I think, the obvious one. Big frame corner, finished up as one of the top corners in the country. Number 51 player in the overall consensus rankings. And I believe number 6 corner is what he ended up at. Let me confirm that. Yeah, number 6 corner is what he ended up at nationally. And so again, what is Nebraska getting here? 6'2", 180-pound corner. Had 5 interceptions as a senior, 2 multi-interception games, playing up against a national schedule. This is the guy who, over the last year and a half or so, I would say, really saw his stock skyrocket. Started his career in Farrell, Pennsylvania, moved down to Orlando to play at First Academy. Addison Williams was actually one of the first to offer him when Addison was at UCF, saw him at a camp or a 7-on-7 camp. And immediately offered, has maintained that relationship, got to Nebraska, immediately prioritized him and his teammate, Devin Jackson, who, of course, Nebraska ended up missing out on to Oregon. But Odom was a top priority pretty much once Addison took this job. And for good reason. Once he got down to Orlando and once he started playing up national competition or top competition in Orlando and then got up in the 7-on-7 circuit, it's kind of clear this was a guy. This is a big frame corner. With a really rangy, like not just 6'2", but has like a rangy wingspan. I believe his wingspan came in a few inches short of 7 foot, so plus wingspan. And a guy who plays bigger than his size, does a really good job, is really technically sound in coverage. I think there's going to be I think the one question with him had been up until the All-American Bowl was just like, okay, well, he doesn't have any like he didn't run track. There's a whole lot of verified testing with him. How is he going to stack up, athletically? And, he showed up to the All-American Bowl and was pretty consistent. Like, was the guy that was giving the top receivers in attendance the most trouble pretty consistently, outside of Brandon Arrington, who ended up the number 1 corner and signed with Texas A&M. That was another Nebraska target at one point in time here in the cycle. Odom is a guy that, fully capable as a freshman of playing outside corner in the SEC or the Big Ten or any of these big time conferences, plays with the confidence and just the mentality that you need at the cornerback position. He's not a talker, but he'll talk when he needs to. He's pretty quiet, keeps to himself. Physical, I think the biggest thing beyond the everything you talk about in terms of coverage, he's willing to hit, and like it's the one thing that stuck with me from that All-American Bowl week. The Wednesday practice, he pretty much almost single-handedly kind of elevated the physicality in that practice. It was like one of the first plays of the scrimmage, and he just sticks a running back against the sideline, like lifts him up. He shed a block. And then stuck the running back and kind of drew an audible reaction from his teammates, and from people on the sidelines. And from there, people were hitting. It got to a point where the next day they had to really dial back practice because coaches were making calls of like, hey, these guys are signed and paid and all of that. Let's not get them hurt at the All-American Bowl. And that was just Danny. That was just kind of Danny and a couple guys on the defense that kind of elevated that. So he's going to hit. He's going to be willing to hit. You're going to see that in spring. You're going to see that when he's out there in the fall. I think beyond Danny, you look down the list. In my opinion, I think Rex Waterman of the offensive lineman is a guy I would look to potentially working into the rotation. I think he's got the highest floor of the offensive linemen they've added. Claude Puma's, of course, got the highest ceiling, but I just don't know from a technique standpoint, he's football young. He's only played football for 2 years. This is your future, ideally future friend, like future program left tackle. But he's going to need about a year or so to really get the technique down, really kind of convert his body into some good weight, because he went up from 260 pounds up to like near 340 pounds in the course of 2 years of playing football. Just need some work on that body to kind of bring that weight down to, it's not a bad weight by any means, but just the weight distribution on his body probably needs to improve. I would say besides that, Larry Miles at slot receiver, I could see him providing some depth behind Ja'Cory Barney and others at slot. Nayland Scott, another like young, big framed receiver they're excited about. And then Jamal Rule, just solely because they did not add in the running back room. They clearly have some confidence in the guys. And for Rule, I mean, the biggest question for him coming out of high school was just the ability to add some weight to his frame. He's pretty wiry. So just the ability to add some mass. So far, it seems like that's coming along. But he's a guy that's older for the cycle. He technically reclassified down from the 2025 cycle down to the 26. So he is technically the older side for the class. And so that's for a couple of different reasons, just what he put up on tape as a senior, the age, and again, so far from what we've heard, adding the weight well, I think he has a chance to potentially work into that running back rotation as well.
There's probably a few of these guys that fit in this category, but who do you think kind of represented some of the biggest recruiting battles, maybe even surprised you that Nebraska was able to come away, or if you want to look at it another way, hold on to the commitment of?
Odom was one, just because I don't think I'm ever going to forget the stretch of covering that commitment and like the lead up to that commitment, because it was swinging all different kinds of ways in the hours, kind of the days and the hours leading up to it. We were at Rivals 5-Star the day he committed, and like I show up that morning, and Chad Simmons and Sam Spiegel, like all our guys, like John Garcia, who's like our South Florida guy at the time, and Chad and all these guys, like, hey, what are you hearing on Daniel? He was like, listen, Nebraska's confident, but like a couple other programs are also confident. So it just was a full day of just like, okay, well, Ohio State's this. Weirdly, the thing that I come back to, which is weird for me, Oklahoma weirdly had a lot of confidence leading up to his commitment.
He was silently committed to Oklahoma. So he committed to Oklahoma before he left that visit. And then they thought they were going to lose him. And then they thought they got him back. And then they thought they were going to lose him. This was like every time he left Oklahoma, or after he left Oklahoma and took another visit, they thought they were going to lose him. And then they would get him on the phone and thought they had him back. Like it was just this recurring thing there.
Yeah, and this was one where ultimately I think it was the relationship of Addison Williams, and this was one where Nebraska flexed their NIL muscle a little. Like they really did, and like to beat out Ohio State head to head on signing day, it took a little more than maybe what they were initially willing to offer, but they got that done. And then after that was pretty much like, I mean, the other schools tried. Michigan offered a couple of weeks after he committed. Ohio State did not stop trying to pursue. Clemson stayed in pursuit, but once he committed, like, yeah, there were some conversations with some other schools. The other schools definitely tried, but he was pretty locked in. Claude was another one where it was SEC. It was an SEC battle. Primarily, you had programs in the region that were in it, but this was ultimately felt like it came down to Florida, Auburn, Nebraska. Really, Michigan, Ohio State were in there, but ultimately came down to those three programs. That wasn't even like that one. It's a big win because of the player, but like, I mean, a lot of credit to EJ Bartel, Keith Williams, and the staff for getting that, because that was one, again, never wavered. And that was a guy I thought, especially with the senior year, like playing at a program like Mount Carmel that has recruiters coming in all the time, eyes on him, and just what that frame, like you walk into Mount Carmel and see a Mount Carmel game, that's a guy you're not going to miss, just with what he looked like as a senior. I was just really surprised that there wasn't really any. School certainly tried, but there was no interest in a visit. There was nothing of that. He stayed pretty locked in. The one I thought about actually, and I actually did not mention this guy in the early contributors because it's still in my mind, but absolutely in the early contributors, Luke Sorensen. That was one where by the time Nebraska landed his commitment, it just came down to them in Penn State. But when you think about what Penn State, again, this is Penn State before the
James Franklin, Penn State, when they're building one of the top recruiting classes in the country.
And when they were pitching him specifically on saying, hey, we want you to come here and be Tyler Warren. Like we have the Tyler Warren role and we want you to play that role for us. And that's a hard thing for a tight end in this day and age to pass up. But and I know he's taking some flack around here, but this was one credit to Marcus Satterfield. Like, and the effort that he put into this recruitment, the conversations he had, the relationship he built, got this one done. And this is one where, again, like you look at the ranking 3-star tight end, but you look at the offer list and specifically who was offering around the time Nebraska did. Nebraska offered around the same time as Michigan and Penn State and Texas A&M and Miami and all these other programs. But the difference was Marcus Satterfield drove down from like Fresno down to Anaheim to offer him, and that made that stuck with him. And then he came up to Nebraska a couple of weeks later, kept coming back. And yeah, ultimately Nebraska won that one out. And then Nayland Scott, the receiver, because they're flipping him from Arizona State. Again, no small feat to flip a receiver from Hines Ward. Like, that's not a small thing, especially considering Arizona State has a no visit policy. Nebraska got him back on campus for an official visit, despite that no visit policy, and got him to flip. So I think those were some of the biggest wins in my opinion.
Yeah. To add a little more context to Sorensen. So when Nebraska offered him, Florida had offered maybe like a few days before in December. And he, like, that was sort of the, whoa, like this is a thing. Like before it had been kind of regional or Mountain West or, future new look Pac-12, if you would. But then like Florida offers and the family was basically, oh, okay, this is interesting. And then Nebraska comes in and everybody else sort of comes in. I remember asking one of the evaluators at 24/7 Sports at the time, and I was like, hey, is one of our West Coast guys, like, hey, like what's the deal with this? And he's just like, honestly, I think it's because everybody loves the film. He's like a throwback tight end that you don't have to project blocking. Like this is a guy that you put the film on and you're not like, oh, he's going to have to learn how to play in line. It's, oh, he can play in line and he's super athletic and untapped as a wide receiver, or not, as a receiver in a passing offense. So I think that's the thing that had people pretty fired up about Luke Sorensen. Nebraska's quest for a tight end was pretty wild in the 2026 class, because it started where it looked like Camden Jensen was kind of the guy they really wanted. And then I think they would have had an opportunity to have Camden Jensen, and they had to like talk themselves fully into Luke Sorensen at that point. And just they canceled the visit with I think Lincoln Watkins and some other guys too. And so it was it's sort of an interesting situation where they had Isaac Jensen in state and they had all these guys, but they really zeroed in on Camden Jensen and Luke Sorensen early. And then I think they were just smitten. Like, I think that's genuinely, even though he's not the highest rated, I think that's one of them where they feel like they'd really have to screw it up for it to not go well with Luke Sorensen.
Yeah, that for sure. And I think even less than that, like him and Jamal Rule are kind of similar, where like relative to some of the other targets, like they popped up on the radar later, but they skyrocketed to like way up there on the board, where like Nebraska was willing to take both of those guys over guys that were quote unquote higher ranked or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. Who's someone that you think is maybe a little bit undervalued, whether it's the recruiting services, how the fans are discussing them, anything like that? Obviously, in a small class, there's not a lot of options, but there's always, the guy or two that kind of stands out as you don't really talk about him.
Yeah, Sorensen has been kind of the one for me, but the other one I think is just Miles, just because I think he gets forgotten just as a, like, you look at Slider, like kind of smaller receiver, and there's, maybe not much to be excited about because he looks like guys that have been on the, but I mean, this is like so on the 7-on-7 circuit at Orlando Jones, like leading them to state championship, like he just gets open. He just gets open. He's got a knack for creating after the catch. He, is again, not the biggest, not the fastest, but big enough, fast enough, does all that stuff well. Comes in, I think, with a high enough floor to work into that rotation. And like I mentioned, we talk about all these early contributors, and everyone points to Danny Odom and Luke Sorensen in particular, and like optimistic about one of those offensive linemen maybe working in there. I mean, the receiver room is deep, it's talented. I can see a world where Miles has maybe not Ja'Cory Barney-esque, because Nebraska's room is in a much better place than when Ja'Cory Barney first joined the program, but I wouldn't be surprised if like mid-season to late season where there's enough flashes where like, oh, this Nebraska's a guy here. Like there's something here in Larry Miles.
Yeah, somebody down in Florida after that commitment hit me up, and they're like, "This is one of those guys that in 3 years, if he's doing what I think he could be doing at Nebraska, the schools down here grumble about how they never should have let him out of the state the first time." And it's not from like people knew who he was. I
Yeah.
think it's just that his physical stature doesn't hit that level for some teams where it's like an auto offer, but the production has been there at every level, whether it's the high school, the 7-on-7, any of that sort of thing. He's just a little bit more slight in build. And I think that just some teams in that area, because there's such a wealth of athlete, they can choose to be a little bit more picky, but sometimes you end up passing up on guys who you just know are going to be productive because that's their personality. And I kind of think that's Larry Miles.
Yeah, totally agree. And that was one where I'm sure you remember too. Like one, he basically was committed, before he announced his commitment. But he went out to the OT7 national championship, like right before he committed, and like showed out. Had like was
Yeah.
one of the best receivers, if not the best receiver.
That's where that message came from. It's like, hey, I'm
Yeah,
watching this guy. I think he had Nebraska gloves on or whatever it
yeah,
was.
yeah.
And
And
it's like, was he playing with Trey Taylor at that
yes,
too?
yeah,
Yeah,
24
so
Trey.
that's what it was. And it's like, hey, I'm watching Nebraska's touchdown connection in 2028 today. Here at this 7-on-7, Florida coaches are going to be grumbling about this. Like,
Yeah,
sure, I can go back and find the exact message, but yeah, I mean, he's certainly someone where it's interesting too because he was sort of popped up late, not I don't know, late on the radar, but he was the guy that was out visiting Oregon and then hit Nebraska on the way back through. Like
yeah, like
it
yeah.
didn't feel like he was as high on the board, and then it kind of happened for Nebraska, and they I don't want to say lucked into it, but it worked out really well for him.
Yeah, yeah, this and maybe when once you get through it and they're all signed, we can maybe take a look back on it. But very much feels like one of those like Trey Taylor type effects because they were teammates, and Trade committed and it was like, hey, we're looking for a slot receiver. Here's a guy that's pretty productive. The way it all worked out too, where like he made that first unofficial visit. And I don't know if you interviewed him after that. I remember calling him after that visit and like asking him about it. And he certainly seemed excited, but all of his answers were so like blunt and short. I was like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm really curious to see what this is. He's just like he's very straight to the point. Very
Yes.
much so. And so we did that
You're
interview.
not getting a lot of color and description. You're just getting the
Yeah.
direct answer.
So I was like, okay, well, maybe Nebraska feels good. They got an official visit scheduled with them. We'll see how this goes. And then I'm texting with Trey and asking him how it went. He was like, yeah, we're getting him. Like, he's coming. And I was like, well, I didn't really get that from the conversation. But yeah, like as he went through the process, got to know DeKeel Shorts, got to know the staff, him and his mom and his family just kind of developed this relate and very quickly over the course of like 2-3 weeks, essentially, developed such a good relationship with the staff that I mentioned that OT7 national championship. He played so well there. He had SEC schools and ACC schools and like top programs in the region being like, hey, whatever they're paying you, like we'll just like just flat out throwing money and just saying, hey, we'll give you this to commit right now, or we'll give you this to flip, or like whatever. He never even like considered it. He just kind of stuck with it. July 1st announced his commitment to Nebraska. No drama, no real concern there. One of those guys that, like you mentioned, in 2-3 years, yeah, the Florida schools, like they did with Ja'Cory Barney, will be like, well, why'd we let this guy get out of the state?
Yeah, absolutely. Last one out of these. Who's a guy that you can see Nebraska's strength and conditioning not necessarily turn into a different looking player, but maybe get the fullest out of their frame?
That's a good one.
There's a lot of good frames in this class, which is a thing that obviously Matt Rule and their staff really go after.
I want to say Jamal probably of the guys, like just because I'm curious to see what that looks like, with 2 years in the strength and conditioning program. But I think a name we haven't really talked about, and he won't get here till the summer. I'm kind of curious to see what Jace Reynolds looks like
Yeah.
within this program, like as he continues to develop, because his frame even developed a little differently than I expected through high school. Like he obviously popped up on Nebraska's radar, I mean, so long ago, but like his senior year, I like what I saw. I think there's some stuff there. Like I'm curious to see how he continues to develop. Do you have one here?
What
Oh,
for?
just a name, like a name here.
Oh, for who I would think that I'm
Uh-huh.
curious about. Partly because he's already starts so big. Like, what does a Nalin Scott look like?
That's a
At,
yeah.
like because he's already. Can he have sort of the? This is a guy that maybe a little bit before your time. You might know him more from the NFL when he played with the Jets, but could he have sort of the Quincy Enunwa build where it's like you think he's much bigger than he is, but he's really like a 6'1", almost 6'2", 225, just muscular wide receiver that just moves people like a
Yeah.
physical threat from the outside. Like I do wonder if that's in there. I'm always predisposed to look at wide receivers in that regard because I think you think that they sort of come in and they look the same, and you forget that some of those guys really can transform what they look like. And it matters when you're talking about being able to block on the edge, physically separate in the Big Ten or in the red zone, an area where, Nebraska likes to throw some of those contested balls. You've got to be able to fight for that kind of space.
Yeah. Like if he can look, I mean, even less than that, like, Quincy's one of those, and I think weight wise, they're about the same, but like physically, if he can look like Isaiah Hunter at some point, that'd be
Yep.
great.
Yeah, that's probably a much more recent fair comparison. I don't know if, and it's been a while since I've had to, or I shouldn't say had, but watched the film of Scott. I don't know if he's as explosive as Hunter can be
No,
at
like
times,
they're different skill sets for sure.
but
I think,
I
yeah,
do. I like that idea of getting, especially in the Big Ten. Like, I just think you have to have those physical outside wide receivers because the defensive backs, like the Danny Odom types, love to kind of take care of you if you can't get off
yeah.
the line of scrimmage. All right, let's shift gears a little bit here. Dive into some 2027. Nebraska had their junior day. So how was the junior day kind of set up? Was it on Saturday and then guys kind of stuck around for the basketball game on Sunday? Was it I think it was a much smaller grouping than what we've seen in the past. How do you feel like it sort of went? And is there anybody that's coming out of that? I've seen some Kyler Kuhn stuff on social media. Is there anybody coming out of that where you think Nebraska really set themselves up well here?
Yeah, I thought they did a good job with the guys that were in town. All things considered, I thought the emphasis this weekend was for a lot of the guys that were back in town. This was a real good opportunity to like really connect with the coaching staff and some of the commits, and just kind of build that like culture. Like then that's something the staff's trying to do within the class itself. The commits are trying to do. I thought they did really well on. I mean, the offensive line. I think they coming out of the weekend in pretty good spot for Kyler Kuhn. Put it up today, but they are leading for Timmy Aliu coming out of the weekend, four-star offensive tackle out of Georgia. That's a guy that's got Georgia in the mix, got Auburn in the mix, has, programs closer to home in the mix, but really likes Jeep Wade, really likes the staff.
Is that a Jeep Wade connection there?
Yeah,
down in
he
Georgia?
Georgia Tech guy. Like I asked him kind of like, what is it like kind of connecting with Jeep Wade? He's like, me and him, we've been in the South for a while now. We both made the trek up to the Midwest. So it's been a while, but it's been good. He was happy to reconnect with him. Sees a fit in the along the offensive line. He's a versatile, athletic kind of guy that can play tackle or guard. Sees a fit in what Wade's building. So that's one that's going to take some time just because he's planning to take his official visits and all of that. But like where Nebraska stands right now. And then the third one, Barrett Cottrell, in-state legacy offensive lineman, who emerged as a target once Wade took the job. Had previously visited Nebraska, was not offered by Donovan Raiola, was not offered by the previous offensive line group here. And Wade kind of prioritized him pretty early on, has made him feel like a priority. You're still battling Iowa, you're still battling a few programs, but this is a Nebraska legacy who feels wanted by Nebraska now, who's connected well with Jeep Wade. Just think it's a matter of time before Nebraska gets this one done. And he's another one that like athletic kind of guard center type who really fits, plays basketball as well, has all of that. I thought, quarterback, obviously Trey was in town with some of the top commits, had a good weekend just connecting with Keyshawn Bowman, number 6 receiver in the country. That's one, again, it's going to take some time in that recruitment. We'll see kind of where things at. What I was really interested in on the defensive side of the ball was they brought in Waylon Wooten, 6'2", 300-pounder out of Loganville Grayson. That's a big body. That's obviously, we talk about these 300-pounders they need. That's a guy to relatively from a program like Grayson, a 3-star, but has some big-time offers, has some programs in the mix. Really like Nebraska, really like Corey Brown, and is a bit different than some of the other. I'm going to have a story tomorrow on it, but really it looks a bit different than some of the other D linemen they've recently offered or prioritized. One of the few on the true north end of 300 pounds. You kind of get the sense he's one of those guys they're targeting at like that shade tech. And so that was one first-time visitor, expecting him to get back on campus. And then in 28, you had Barry Marshall on campus, and he's a Missouri legacy, of course. His older brother plays defensive line there, but my read on it has so far has been he's kind of doing his recruitment his own way. He's looking for the best fit for him, not necessarily looking to follow his brother. So far, it feels like the best fit, just from talking to him, has been Nebraska so far. He really likes Jamar Mosey, and he loves kind of what they're doing with outside receivers. Last spring, it was Dane Key that he was drawn to. This time around, he spent some time around Isaiah Hunter and Nayland Scott, and some of the other bigger bodies on this. And, of course, Quasi Gilmer. So he sees like comps, and he sees like kind of how he would be used at Nebraska and what Nebraska could do for him, what the offense would look like. He spent a lot of time. This is a big weekend for him just to get around Trey, to get around some of those 27 commits as well. As a 28 recruit, obviously still has some time, but Trey's going to be on campus by the time he's going through his decision process. Like, I think building that relationship pretty early on is important. But as for the structure you mentioned, like, Saturday just kind of felt like a kind of hanging out, touring the facility, getting into some meetings. Sunday, a few guys stuck around. A good bit of the guys actually ended up sticking around. And Kuhn didn't make it in Saturday, was at Missouri Saturday, came in on Sunday, caught the basketball game, hung around with the staff. The big thing for everybody is coming out of the weekend was they really loved just being in attendance at that basketball game, seeing the Nebraska fan base on display. But two was through that game and just through the time on campus, getting to connect with the staff, because they didn't get to do that. The guys that visited in the fall, just because of game day. I mean, game day weekends are so hectic.
It's really tough.
It's tough. So they all left with a better impression of the staff and the campus, and you kind of understand why the staff cares so much and prioritizes getting guys on campus in the spring and in these off-season type events, for these off-season events, because for them, especially with the results being what they are on the field, they get more momentum sometimes from these type of visits than they do from game day visits, which showcase a lot, but there isn't really time to build connections with the staff and build those relationships. And to a lot of guys, that's Nebraska's biggest selling point on top of everything else they do, is they really care and they build those authentic relationships. And when you don't really get it, you come on staff, you hear all about that, and you don't really get that FaceTime with the staff, it can be a little off-putting. But when you actually come on during a weekend when they're freer and you're the priority, you leave feeling like a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. Miles Taylor was Nebraska's safeties coach for about 3 or 4 weeks here. He is departing to go be the defensive backs coach or a secondary coach in the NFL with the Baltimore Ravens. What it highlights, though, to me, Tim, is just how different of a spot we are in now with college football, where you can have a much larger coaching staff. Have you gotten the sense from recruits that there's a real value to them that, rather than having a linebackers coach, you might have a linebackers coach specifically for your position? If you're an edge rusher, it's not just, you might work with Corey Brown, sure, but you've also got Roy Manning. Do you think there's a value in having almost like each position has their own coach in a way that we really haven't seen before? Have you heard, has that ever come up at all? Is that something that you think Nebraska's maybe approaching here, both in terms of the development of the players that are already here, but also to show prospective, players, hey, like, we're serious about making you the best version of this, so we're getting you as much one-to-one interaction and coaching interaction as we can?
The positions they've already had kind of multiple coaches working has been where you've already seen it. So the hope is like, at receivers, right. I mean, receivers that come on campus love the fact that especially when they're at spring practice or even at games, they're like, well, yeah, I can get work with D'Keil Shorts, but like, I can also get work with Andrew Verbois. Like, that's the guys in the secondary, like, Danny Odom, for example, was like, look, like, it's great. I love Addison Williams, but like getting around practice and seeing like Phil Snow there and knowing again, like, and I know again, opinions around here on Phil Snow or whatever. It's a guy he's got decades of experience coaching defensive backs and coaching defenses. Like, that's a guy
there should not be negative opinions of Phil Snow. Like,
but yeah,
I understand where it comes from, but his value to what they're doing, and particularly with defensive backs, is pretty high.
Yeah, and it means a lot to defensive backs that it's like, look, I'm being coached by Addison Williams, but like at any point, if I need something, I can always go to this guy that has decades of experience at the position and has produced NFL talent at the position for advice, for whatever. And guys love talking the game with him. I mean, like every time I think I saw it at all last year at camps, and we've seen it a lot. Every time I've seen Donovan Jones and Phil Snow in the same room, they are attached at the hip and they are talking constantly. Like Donovan's one of the guys that is fully taking advantage of having that guy as a resource. But a lot of the DBs like do. And so the hope is, I mean, we saw that a little bit in the season of, some D linemen really like that, they had Terry Braden, they also had Ira, working with, and Phil Simpson. And like, and so we'll see what this looks like in spring. I'm really excited to get like some of the first time visitors in particular. And even the guys that have not been to campus or that have been to campus before, but are visiting for the first time under this new defensive staff, what they think of, okay, well, here's what it looks like when you have, these two guys coaching you on the D line, especially some of these guys. You look at like guys they'll need to like, if they're able to get like a Marcus Facatu on campus here in the spring, that's a guy that, you would really need some momentum with. What does he think of Corey Brown and Roy Manning? Like what does he think of that? What is some of these top Jameer Lee, who I'm writing about right now out of Sarasota, but like what does he think of this? I'm really excited to see how all of that progresses. The other one on the offensive side of the ball, I'm assuming, and so far from what we heard, all the offensive linemen primarily talk Jeep Wade. I'm still kind of curious to figure out how Lonnie Teasley fits into all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a fair one, because I think in my head it was like Teasley's the recruiting coach and Jeep Wade is sort of your technician development guy. And that's a really rudimentary way to slice it down. I mean, Teasley's going to be involved in other things besides just recruiting. But honestly, we've talked about this on this show before. I mean, Jeep Wade has kind of been sort of the most,
Even the most exciting of the new additions for sure.
Exciting wasn't the word I wanted to use. That's where I was at too. There's another word I'm trying to come up with, but I guess I'm somewhat surprised by like how visible. And then certainly just reading your work and following some other stuff, like that guy is just connecting with everybody.
Yeah.
Like it is like an offensive lineman by and large, like other offensive linemen. They're a position group that hangs out as a group. They're a unit. Like more than any other position group, they are a unit. And they tend to have guys that think and talk and act and all do that the same. And Jeep Wade seems like a good old boy offensive lineman that also can help get you to a really high level in your game.
Yeah, I think the body of work part of it is what kind of allows him and to kind of speak to that, because offensive linemen loved what Georgia Tech has done recently, like, and I mean, talking to guys over the weekend, like the first thing I was like, well, what do you think of your fit there? He's like, man, it's really cool that, we're going to run some zone. Like Jeep Wade really likes to let his guys run. Like these guys are athletes too, and they want a chance to showcase that they're athletes.
Well, yeah, they want to pick off the small guys.
Yeah.
Every offensive lineman everywhere loves run blocking.
Yeah,
absolutely loves it.
So they're all excited about that. So like that's the one I think of the guys they added. If you told me when they added them, like ranking them in terms of recruiting and on field, like what I'm expecting from him on field, Jeep Wade probably would have been the number one. I was most excited to see what he does on the field. And would have been like in the middle to not even necessarily the bottom, but like I kind of, like you said, expected Teasley to be the recruiter. But so far, he's been like, of the guys they've added, the top recruiters thus far. And, from an X's and O's and scheme standpoint, seems like he has a lot of say just in terms of what the offensive line is going to do, what the offense is going to look like. And we really haven't seen that yet, but I'm really, really excited to see how they pair what he's done in the run game at Georgia Tech with what they've already done offensively.
Where does kind of Jamar Mosey fit into everything? They named him assistant head coach. I think he's still really involved in their recruiting operation with what they're doing there. I'm pretty sure he was out on the road in January and hitting spots and everything else. This was a guy that I think has been an effective recruiter, certainly with some of the Kansas City connections that he had, but also just seems to be a good person to have out there on the road to represent Nebraska.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Kansas City connections are still really strong. I think that's going to be the big thing. He's going to be a guy that I think, early, like so far in his career, is primarily pitched in on the offensive side of the ball. I think moving forward, he's going to be a guy that is your, like, hey, we need a recruiting boost. like let's add Jamar Mosey like to the mix. But he's going to be important here in this 27 cycle. We talked about Kyler Kuhn. That's maybe the top guy you're after in Kansas City. If you want to land him, it's going to be because of Jamar Mosey's effort. You're in a head-to-head battle with Oklahoma, with a couple of national powers lurking for Samaj Stanford, 4-star safety out of Broken Arrow. If you want to land him, it's going to be Jamar Mosey. And if they do, it's going to be because of Jamar Mosey's effort through that recruitment. And those are two top targets here in this 27 cycle. And you go deeper into Missouri, what they're trying there in St. Louis as well. I think his efforts are important. Marshawn Ivy, those guys. Keith Williams, of course, a huge presence in St. Louis as well. But yeah, I think becoming more of this like not every man, but like just kind of a do-it-all recruiter type that obviously has his regions. He's Kansas, he's Oklahoma. He was in Texas too. He was making some rounds in Texas, so we kind of spotted him down there too. But kind of this kind of mid-south region for Nebraska. What I'm curious to see though, moving forward as they build out this 27 class and look ahead to 28, are there any recruitments that he starts to like kind of solely own? And if so, what does that look like? Because he's a good relationship builder. He's really good at selling Nebraska to recruits. Is he capable of kind of owning a recruitment?
Is there a world where he's even more effective if his son has like a strong season? Like,
I think so.
you kind of understand what I'm asking? Like, is it a way that it's easier to go into a living room or to talk to a recruit and be like, yeah, this is what I believe about Nebraska, when it's also you've got a relatively high profile recruit for a son that's now putting up numbers as a running back at Nebraska too?
Yeah, I think if you consider the situation like flipping, hey, I trusted Matt Rule and this staff to develop my son. And
we didn't go to Oregon because of X,
yes,
that kind of
thing. We trusted them when they wanted us to change positions to running back, and we like all of that too, of just like they trust that they have the right vision. And yeah, I think that would be more effective for like, yeah, absolutely. And even when you go into Kansas City, I mean, yeah, Jamar Mosey's a name, but like Isaiah Mosey was also a name in Kansas City.
Yep.
I think that would really be a big boost to see Mosey have success here.
And Winery too.
Yeah.
Kind of forget there's another year of that guy coming.
Yeah.
We
at least one more. Yeah.
Hopefully there's, we'll see. If it's that good, one more could be plenty to suffice, but we shall see. Tim, what are you going to do with this alleged dead period that you have on your hands?
Yeah, it's like 2 weekends. And yeah, it's
wow, 2 whole weekends.
No, obviously Super Bowl weekend. I owe my girlfriend a lot because she's put up with a lot over these last couple of months of just, hey, I can't do anything right now. I have to be here, or I'm going to San Antonio for a week. I'm sorry. And so she's put up with a lot. So yeah, definitely getting some quality time there. And starting to plan out. Not planning out. If she's listening, I'm not planning it out, but getting ready for Valentine's Day, getting all of that prepared. I have a plan in place, but yes, definitely putting together the plan for that. But no, definitely going to enjoy these like next 2 weeks before we get back into spring ball, which at least those first 2 weeks won't have much recruiting going on. But
right,
once we get back into March, we'll be back into it.
All right, excellent. Well, we'll be back into it next Thursday on another Building Blocks Thursday with Tim Verghese of Inside Nebraska, the best in the business to do it. And we appreciate, as always, his time here on Thursdays. All right. I will be back with another Unemployed with Mike Schaefer on a Feedback Friday. If you have questions, if you have feedback, be sure to hit us up at you can hit us up at UnemployedI80 on Twitter, UnemployedI80@gmail.com. You can just tweet at me at Mike J. Schaefer if you want to do that. You can leave comments in the YouTube page. However you want to get a hold, get the Discord. Go chat with the people at the Discord. However you want to leave feedback, leave comments, leave questions. If you have a blind rankings idea for Jack Mitchell, we didn't get to one with Tim today. I thought about throwing one at him, but there's too much other stuff I wanted to cover. Feel free to hit me up with that. We will get that done. Feedback Friday tomorrow. We'll catch you then.